Okay, apologize. We all ready? Thank you and good afternoon. Your district attorney. Back with numerous guilty verdicts, counts 1 and 2, guilty for continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, guilty on counts 4, 5, 6, and 7 of indecency of a child touching. Yesterday evening, the jury came back in punishment. They gave Mr. Montiano 99 years plus a $10,000 fine for each of the 2 continuous sexual abuse counts. They gave him 20 years plus a $10,000 fine on each of the indecency counts. They did find him not guilty of count 3, aggravated sexual assault of a child less than 6 years of age. This morning, Judge Marcos Lizarga of the 168th, who had presided over the trial, stacked the 2 continuous sexual abuse charges. That will result in Mr. Montiano being sentenced to 198 years in prison. I want to emphasize that this is the largest sentence that we have gotten in the past 2 years during my administration. I'm extremely proud of the extremely hard work that went into this case. But most of all, I want to emphasize to anyone who thinks that they can victimize children in our community. The last time we went to trial on a case like this, we got 170 years in prison. This time, we got 198 years in prison. If you victimize children in this community, the jury has spoken, the judges have spoken, you will go to prison, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. We protect our children in this community. Do not victimize our children. You will go to prison forever. That is the message from the jury. That is the message from the judiciary. We thank Judge Lizarga for a good trial. We thank him for doing the just thing and stacking the sentences, ordering that the sentences run continuous sexual abuse counts. And we thank the jury for doing the right thing and sending the right message that sexual abuse of our children will not be tolerated. I'd like to call up Eric Willard, Assistant District Attorney, and Jonathan Amber, also Assistant District Attorney. These 2 men are true warriors for justice. These men are the men who are also responsible for the 170 years in prison on the other sex offender and are now responsible for getting the 190 Montiano. They are fantastic lawyers who have done a fantastic job. 2 little girls who were abused to even think about. Justice has come for those little girls. Justice comes for all of our community when a sex offender is taken off the street forever. Thank you. Thank you. I'll answer your questions.
How old were the victims and the relationship to them?
They started out at ages 5 and 6 and continued for over a 5-year period of time.
And his relationship to them?
He was the boyfriend of the mother.
What was some of the key evidence presented in the case?
The testimony of the 2 little girls. We also had an expert who flew in from Houston who provided some key evidence on explaining to a jury how children develop and explain to the jury how a child explains their story and how as a child develops in age and gets more comfortable with the people that tell more about what has happened to them. You have to understand when a child is first victimized, it's very difficult for that child to give details on what has happened to them, to even understand what has happened to them. So when they give their first initial outcry and they first start talking about what has happened to them, it's very, very difficult for a child to talk in any kind of detail about what has happened. It's hard for us as adults who are sitting in the jury box to understand what that child has gone through. For us as adults in our adult brains to understand what a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, or even a 10-year-old is thinking and what they were thinking in that moment as a child, being with all these adult authoritative figures above them. This expert helps to relate to the jury what the mind of the child is going through and how that child is developing and how the child is able to relate their story to not just the jurors but to law enforcement as it goes.
They wanted me to ask you about another case involving a former educator of Socorro Independent School District by the name of Lujan Alamares. Any updates on that?
We're aware of the case. Our office does not rush on indictments of particular won't talk about the specifics of it, but I will say this, that cases of particular significance like that need to be very carefully investigated. Make sure that we have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed before we take the case to a grand jury. We're in the process of doing that, making sure that we have a very good investigation and everything is lined up. We want to make sure that when we indict that case and we take it to a grand jury, that we're ready to go to trial, so that when we take that case to trial, that case also is ready to go for a jury verdict of another 199 years in prison.
How long was this trial?
We were in trial for about two weeks.
And then you already talked about this a little bit, but under your tenure, we've seen juries come back with more and more stricter sentencing. Can you talk a little about that, what it means to your office and what it means to the Paso community?
A combination of things, not just COVID, but also some issues that the Rosales administration had, but also largely part of COVID. There were a lot of child sex cases that were put on the back burner, were not taken to trial. So during my administration, we've seen so many of these child sex cases that are from the time of indictment 4, 5, 6 years old even. So it has been our very concerted effort to try to take some of these cases to get them to trial. We've off many times with a delayed outcry. The sexual abuse happened and it's a year, 2, 4, 5 years later before the child is brave enough to make the outcry in order to start trying to seek their justice. And then to have that case now languishing in the courts for 3 years, 4 years, maybe even 5 years, it's even more difficult on the victims. It's certainly difficult on a defendant who has that hanging over their head as well. So we certainly want to try to get these cases to trial as quickly as possible. These types of cases are very unlikely to plead guilty. The very nature of the charge, the fact that any kind of plea will carry with it lifetime registration, it's very difficult for any of these cases to plead guilty. So the vast majority of them end up on a trial docket. Obviously, there are only so many days that we can go to trial in any given year, and so many courts that have that kind of ability to go to trial. We're also competing against murder cases, capital murder cases that are also awaiting trials. So we have been trying to make a very concerted effort of trying to get these cases, particularly these older cases, to trial so that we can start getting justice for these victims. I am extremely proud of the work of my prosecution teams in getting these cases to trial. I'm particularly proud of the work that we've been doing in some of the very substantial jury verdicts that we've been getting. There are certainly cases where we come up on the eve of trial and we realize that we may not have all of the evidence we need, so we're having to either dismiss the case because we're not sure that we can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, or perhaps there are other factors. But the cases that we are going to trial on, I'm very proud of the verdicts we're getting. I'm very proud of the work that these prosecutors are doing and the justice that we're getting for these child victims in particular. And I highlight again 170 years and 198 years that these juries are sending the right message. Do not mess with the children of our community. You will go to prison forever.
I think that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.